Ambassador Jonathan Hayes stood before the Galactic Council, his jaw tight, his hands clenched behind his back. The vast chamber, carved from the crystalline heart of the Council's capital world, shimmered under soft violet light. Representatives of 100 species watched him with varying degrees of boredom, skepticism, and outright disdain. He had given this speech before. He had pleaded before. And yet, they still refused to listen. "The Cthar Dominion is coming," he said, his voice steady but insistent. "We have analyzed their movements, tracked their incursions. They do not negotiate. They do not spare. Their pattern is clear: expansion through annihilation. The colonies they have erased had no warning, no chance to surrender." A ripple of murmurs spread across the chamber. High Chancellor Virox, an imposing Zelnari with sapphire-hued scales and a pair of translucent, fin-like crests rising from his head, exhaled heavily. His 4 golden eyes regarded Hayes with the patience of a parent humoring a persistent child. "Ambassador Hayes," Virox intoned, "the Council acknowledges Earth's concerns, but our fleets are unparalleled. The Zelnari, the Drelvik, the Vothian Armada, our combined forces have held this galaxy in stability for millennia. If these Cthar exist, they would not be the first aggressors to test our defenses, nor the last to be crushed against them." The laughter of the Rillic delegate, a towering, chitinous being whose voice clicked like breaking glass, was the final insult. Hayes had known this was a waste of time before he had even stepped into the chamber, but now, watching them dismiss humanity's warnings as paranoia, he felt something deeper than frustration. He felt the cold weight of inevitability. The Cthar have already wiped out 2 independent colonies, 2 worlds that, days ago, were full of life. We sent a reconnaissance probe to one of them, Belios V. We expected ruins, debris. We found nothing. No bodies, no wreckage, just silence. He let that word linger. They don't just kill, they erase. Virox waved a clawed hand. And yet they have not struck a single world under our protection. Why would a predator avoid the strongest prey? Because they are studying you, Hayes countered. That's what they do. They observe. They map your strengths, your weaknesses. And when they strike, it won't be a test. It will be extinction. The chamber darkened as he activated a hollow display. Grainy footage, taken from a probe's final transmission, filled the air with eerie blue light. A fleet of organic vessels, shifting and pulsing as though alive, loomed over a planet's surface. Then, without warning, space itself seemed to fold. One moment, the ships were there. The next, they were gone. And so was the planet. The murmurs died. Even the Rillic delegate's mandibles twitched in what might have been unease. Hayes stepped forward. "We don't know what technology they're using. We don't know how they can consume entire worlds without leaving a trace. But we do know this: they are coming. And if you refuse to act, the first time you see them in your skies will be the last." Silence. Then the Zelnari Chancellor leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "And what precisely does Earth suggest?" Finally, progress. Hayes forced himself not to betray relief. A unified strike force. Preemptive engagement before they reach the Council's inner systems. If we meet them on the outskirts, we might. Laughter, low at first, then spreading. The Vothian Admiral, his body a writhing mass of bioluminescent tendrils, shook with amusement. Attack a species we do not understand? Commit our fleets to war over assumptions and theories. Hayes turned toward him. And what will you do when they arrive at your core worlds? When they erase your home the way they did Belios V? The Admiral's glow pulsed erratically, but Virox raised a claw, silencing further debate. "Ambassador Hayes," he said, "the Council will take your concerns under advisement, but we will not mobilize against phantoms." That was it. The dismissal. Hayes exhaled slowly, forcing his emotions down. He turned, walking toward the exit, but then stopped. He glanced over his shoulder, and his voice was colder than before. "When your fleets are burning, when your worlds are vanishing, remember this moment. Remember that you were warned." Without waiting for a response, he strode out of the chamber. Outside, the towering spires of the Council's capital stretched toward the stars. A lone figure awaited him, a woman in an Earth military uniform, hands clasped behind her back. Admiral Rachel Vasquez. They're not listening, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Hayes admitted. They never do. Vasquez's expression was unreadable. Then we prepare alone. Hayes nodded. We prepare alone. Above them, the stars gleamed with quiet indifference. The command center aboard the UNSF Aegis was a symphony of controlled urgency. Holographic displays flickered with incoming data streams, strategic projections, and fleet readiness reports. Admiral Rachel Vasquez stood at the central console, arms crossed, her expression carved from stone. The weight of an impending war rested on her shoulders, and she was painfully aware that Earth stood alone. She turned as Jonathan Hayes stepped into the room. His diplomatic attire looked out of place amidst the hardened officers and tactical analysts. I assume the Council won't be joining us, she said dryly. Hayes shook his head. They believe their fleets are untouchable, that the Cathar will break against their defenses like waves against stone. He exhaled sharply. They won't. Vasquez wasn't surprised. She had fought too many battles to place faith in the arrogance of those who had never bled for their survival. Then we don't have time to waste. The room dimmed as the central holographic table activated. A three-dimensional representation of the Sol defense grid hovered above the surface, marked with a lattice of fortifications, shipyards, and patrol routes. Beyond it, the vast darkness of the outer system stretched, where Earth scout ships had already begun tracking the Cathar's movements. Our intelligence suggests the Cathar are still probing the outer sectors. Vasquez continued. They haven't committed their full strength yet. That gives us a narrow window. Hayes studied the display. For what? For turning the battlefield into something they don't expect. She gestured, and the projection shifted. New icons appeared. Ships, thousands of them. Not just the towering dreadnoughts of Earth's main fleet, but smaller vessels, fast-moving and bristling with weaponry. Gunships, stealth corvettes, electronic warfare platforms. Each one designed for a singular purpose. Not to withstand an assault, but to dismantle it. The Council fights with brute force, Vasquez said. Stationary defenses, capital ships, predictable formations. That's why they'll lose. The Cathar aren't a conventional enemy. Hayes narrowed his eyes. And what's our approach? Ambush warfare. A grim smile touched Vasquez's lips. We don't hold the line, we dictate it. We bleed them dry before they even reach a world worth defending. She turned to an awaiting officer. Initiate protocol blackout. I want all fleets running silent. No emissions, no transmissions outside secure channels. If we're alone in this fight, then we make sure the enemy doesn't see us coming. The officer nodded, and within moments, Earth's military presence across the sector began vanishing from conventional tracking networks. To the untrained eye, it would seem as though humanity had gone dark. But in reality, it was only preparing to strike. Deep within Luna's fortified shipyards, the Dauntless stirred to life. The newly commissioned warship was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Its sleek hull designed for both speed and resilience, its core powered by an experimental quantum reactor capable of sustaining energy shields far beyond traditional limits. It was the first of its kind, but it would not be the last. Across the system, orbital factories worked around the clock, producing high-yield railgun slugs, plasma warheads, and gravity mines. Every resource was funneled into a singular purpose: survival. Hayes watched it all unfold from the command deck, arms resting on the railing, as the distant glow of the shipyards reflected in his eyes. He had spent years navigating political landscapes, fighting wars with words. Now, words had failed, and he found himself in a world where only action mattered. Vasquez joined him, her gaze following his. You ever wonder if this is what they wanted? She asked. Hayes frowned. Who? The Council. She leaned against the railing. Maybe they don't believe in their own invincibility. Maybe they just want to see if humanity could handle this fight alone. He considered the thought, but then shook his head. No, if they had any doubts, they would have acted. This isn't a test. It's a failure of leadership. A silence settled between them, the hum of distant thrusters the only sound. Then a soft chime, a priority transmission. Vasquez straightened. Report. A voice crackled through the comms. "This is Argus 7. Scout probe Eclipse has returned from the Belio sector. Data packet received." She exchanged a look with Hayes before nodding. "Patch it through?" The holographic table flickered to life once more, displaying raw telemetry from the probe's journey. It had traveled beyond the last known Cthar incursion point, deep into what should have been empty space. But what it found instead sent a chill through the room. A fleet, not a vanguard, not a scouting force. A full armada, stretching across the void like an ocean of chitin and bioluminescent horror. Thousands of ships, pulsating with unnatural energy, drifting in silent, perfect formation. And beyond them, something larger. Something vast enough to blot out stars. Hayes exhaled. "God help us." Vasquez didn't blink. She turned sharply, issuing orders without hesitation. "Get me fleet command. We accelerate deployment immediately. All vessels move to high alert status. I want every defense protocol online. And prepare the Dauntless for its first field test." The officers scrambled into action, the room alive with movement. Hayes remained still, his mind turning over a singular, inescapable realization. The war was not coming. It had already begun. The void of space trembled. Where there had once been the silence of distant stars, now there was fire, metal, and the terrible, writhing presence of the Cthar Armada. Their ships did not glide like crafted vessels. They pulsed and slithered, moving in unnatural synchronicity, an ocean of living warships blacker than the abyss itself. The Galactic Council's Grand Fleet met them first. It was a wall of arrogance, a formation built on centuries of victories against lesser foes. Thousands of warships, proud and unyielding, held their ground in perfect formation, their shields aglow with energy barriers that had never been breached. The admirals had scoffed at Earth's warnings. Now they would learn. The Cthar did not slow. They did not exchange fire, did not posture. The first wave struck with a fury that defied physics. Their ships did not fire conventional weapons. They became weapons. Chitinous hulls cracked open, releasing bursts of raw, unnatural energy that melted to the Council's defenses like they were paper. Tentacle-like extensions lanced forward, wrapping around battleships and crushing them in seconds. Admiral Vasquez watched from the bridge of the Dauntless, Earth's newest and most advanced warship. The battle was unfolding exactly as she had predicted. The Council's forces were rigid, relying on outdated doctrine, and they were being torn apart. Dozens of capital ships were already burning. Entire squadrons vanished in eerie, soundless implosions. She could hear their desperate calls through the comms, begging for reinforcements, screaming about an enemy that defied understanding. She did not respond. Instead, she turned to her officers. "Bring the fleet online. Execute Ghost Protocol." Across the sector, Earth's forces emerged from the dark. They had been waiting, weapons primed, hidden behind electromagnetic distortions and stealth barriers. The Council had fought wars with overwhelming force. Earth had fought wars knowing it could never afford to lose. That difference was about to decide the fate of the battle. The first strike came in silence. Railguns, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, punched through Cthar vessels before they even realized they were under attack. The second wave followed. Plasma lances, targeted at the strange, organic cores that powered the enemy ships. 100 Cthar vessels burned before they even registered the ambush. The Cthar faltered. Their collective mind, whatever intelligence guided them, had not accounted for this. Earth's ships moved like no fleet the Council had ever fielded, darting unpredictably, firing in coordinated strikes before vanishing into black once more. But the Cthar adapted. Their ships pulsed, shifting their forms, evolving in real time to counter the sudden onslaught. They restructured their defenses, hardened their shells, changed the way they moved. They were learning. Vasquez's jaw tightened. All units. Phase 2. Hit them again before they recover. The Dauntless surged forward, leading the charge. It cut through the chaos, its experimental quantum shields dispersing enemy attacks before they could reach its hull. Flanking it, Earth's smaller warships weaved the battlefield, disrupting Cthar formations with well-placed gravity mines and EMP bursts. On the Council's frequency, a frantic voice broke through. "Human vessels, respond. We. The transmission cut out in static as another dreadnought was torn apart. Hayes, standing at Vasquez's side, watched the carnage unfold. The council had mocked them, had dismissed them. Now, they were dying while humanity stood firm. A massive Cthar warship, larger than anything yet encountered, shifted its course toward the Dauntless. Its surface rippled, the organic plating rearranging itself into something grotesque, spines extending, glowing with unnatural energy. It released a pulse that shattered 3 nearby vessels, their hulls disintegrating into nothingness. "Target that thing," Vasquez ordered. Weapons locked. A coordinated barrage of plasma and railgun fire struck the creature's hide. It screamed, not in sound, but in waves of psionic energy that sent tremors through the ship's systems. Hayes gritted his teeth. "It's trying to break us." "It won't." Vasquez's voice was ice. Fire again. The next salvo hit deep, cracking open the creature's core. A burst of sickly green light erupted from its center as it convulsed, its structure collapsing inward. And just like that, it was gone. Across the battlefield, the Cthar began to hesitate. Their unity fractured. They had anticipated easy prey, a slow conquest. Instead, they were bleeding. And worse, they were afraid. Vasquez seized the moment. Full offensive. Drive them back. The tide turned. Earth's fleet pressed the advantage, pushing through the enemy lines with ruthless precision. The Cthar, for the first time, did not advance. They retreated. The Council, watching from the edges of destruction, could only stare in disbelief. Minutes later, where once an unstoppable armada had stood, only wreckage remained. The battle was over, but Vasquez did not celebrate. She turned to Hayes, her voice grim. This wasn't their full force. Hayes nodded, watching the drifting remains of the enemy. "No," he said, "it was a test." The battlefield was silent now, but the scars remained. Wreckage drifted through the void, shattered remnants of once mighty warships. The Council's grand fleet, their supposed invincible armada, had been reduced to smoldering ruins. The Cthar were gone, retreated, but not defeated. And Earth, the world that stood alone, remained. Admiral Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Dauntless, gazing out at the wreckage. It was not victory she saw. It was a warning. The Cthar had pulled back, but their nature had been made clear. They would adapt, they would return, and next time, they would not underestimate humanity. Behind her, the command doors hissed open. Jonathan Hayes stepped in, his face unreadable. "They're calling a miracle," he said. "The Council, the few that survived." Vasquez scoffed, arms crossed. "A miracle? That wasn't divine intervention. That was preparation. Sacrifice. That was us doing what they refused to." Hayes exhaled, stepping beside her. "And now they want to talk." She turned to face him. "Talk? They didn't listen before. What's changed?" "They're afraid." He gestured to the wreckage beyond the viewport. "Their fleets have never known true loss. They never believed an enemy could break them. But now, they've seen the Cthar for what they are, and they've seen what Earth is capable of." Vasquez studied him for a moment. "So now they want an alliance?" "The High Chancellor has requested an emergency summit. They're offering us a seat at the table, permanent membership in the Council. They want our technology, our tactics. They want us to lead the next war." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Now they see the value in listening. Hayes nodded. They don't have a choice anymore. Silence stretched between them. The weight of what they had won and what it had cost settled over them like a storm waiting to break. Earth had survived, but only just. The Cthar had retreated, but they would return. And next time, they would not make the same mistakes. Vasquez turned back to the viewport, her reflection staring back at her. "This isn't over," she murmured. "No," Hayes agreed. "It's just beginning."